Hi, this is Shawnee Lavender, the Conscious Moms Coach, and I am delighted to be here with you today talking about 3 common mistakes that parents make with their young child's aggressive behavior. Okay, that's a mouthful, so I'm probably only going to say it that one time. Um, so let me clarify something, and then I'll get into it, sharing those 3 mistakes. So I put young child in the title of this webinar because, or this Facebook Live webinar, whatever you'd like to call it. I put young in the title because I did want to indicate that this is really ideally suited for parents who have children preteen or younger. However, that being said, it's really applicable to any child, even older than preteen, because um, the behavior that we're talking about, aggressive behavior, could be hitting, biting, just being mean, that behavior is something that even when children are older, that it is something that still can be very spontaneous and pops up, and still is best dealt with in the same kind of way that we want to deal with our younger children with. So just a couple caveats, but that's what I was intending. But again, if you have somebody older than a preteen, you're welcome to listen in as well. Okay, so let me start with problem or mistake number 1. Before I do that, though, I'm talking about you as a parent, but I'm also talking about me as a parent. I am a parent coach, so I advise and consult with and work with parents around the world to handle common behavior challenges that they have with their children, to handle parent-child relationship issues, building more connection, and helping strengthen bonds of attachment in families. I also help parents work with some of their own issues around managing their big emotions like anger, overwhelm, upset. So I do all those things. And I am a parent myself. And those of you that know me know that I do not hold myself up as the expert. I am an expert probably in one thing, and that's myself. But I do have this knowledge and the training and the awareness to be able to really support families and see some of these issues from a very objective perspective. However, that doesn't mean that I always do things perfectly, not by any stretch of the imagination. I feel very comfortable and confident as a mother. I feel really strong in my skills and the things that I bring to my family and the leadership that I provide in helping us create conscious, loving, peaceful relationships with each other. So just so you know that, it's I share very much, here's where I mess up too. So I'm going to be talking to you and about parents in general, and simply know also that this is my own, I'm taking my own advice. It's always good for me to hear it because there'll be things that I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot that piece. So I was going to get to point number 1, and that's what I'm going to do now. So the mistake number 1 that we parents will make is that we equate aggressive behavior with intentional harm. Let me say that another time. Parents, adults in general, we tend to equate a child's aggressive behavior with an intent to harm. And what I mean by that is that we have an adult lens on aggression. So biting, hitting, kicking, doing things that are physically hurtful to others, or hurtful maybe in an emotional, potentially hurtful in an emotional way. We see that through an adult lens, and we tend to ascribe intent to our children. So this is where, we will talk about, my child is doing this on purpose. Why are they being mean? Why are they doing these things? It's that sense that there is this willful intent on our children's part to be aggressive, to be mean, to be hurtful. And the other thing that reflects, not only is it sort of our adult lens that we look at or look through, it is also the old parent parenting paradigm, which was, and still is, frankly, it's the predominant paradigm that still is in place in our cultures. And that is the idea that children come into the world as these sort of untamed savages, and they need us adults to shape them and mold them and make them into what they're supposed to be. So now you may not think that that's what you think, and yet that is a common underlying belief that we were raised with, and so we have absorbed it, and it's predominant in our culture, so it's the water we swim in. So it's this idea again that, oh, kids behave badly because they are, they need to be shaped and molded and tamed. So that's part of what happens for us when we see our children behave in an aggressive way, that some part of our brain is saying, they're doing it on purpose. They're doing it to be mean, to be hurtful, to strike back, to get revenge, whatever words we put on it. That's the number one mistake we make, is we are ascribing to them an intent to do harm and to be hurtful. So that's a lot of words. So let me pause for a second, and I'm going to check over on Facebook and see if there are any questions or comments with just one mistake shared. So hold on just one second. The second mistake that we parents make with our children's aggressive behavior is that we don't provide them with enough outlets and support for their big feelings. And specifically, I'm talking some feelings like frustration, fear, hurt and sadness, injustice, and unfairness. So I want to pause for a second and invite us all to think about living in an adult world, because that is what it is. It is an adult world. And depending on our family, depending on our culture, we are going to have different levels of autonomy, different levels of respect from adults. And so there's lots of variables. However, in general, what is true is that children are forced in many instances to accept what we adults say, whether we adults are their parents, or we're their teachers, or we're clergy, or we're relatives, or we're friends and neighbors. It doesn't matter really what our role is, that children sort of have to suck it up a lot of the time. And some of the things that they endure might be trivial. We might say, oh, that's no big deal. When I was 8, I had to walk, 2 miles uphill both ways in the snow, la, 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 right? That's what we adults do. But even if they are trivial, so to speak, there are hurts that our children endure. And so they are often expected to literally just suck it up. Like, that's just part of life, kid. You got to get used to it. Well, you know what? That's hard. That's hard. And as adults, I'm not going to go too far into the adult realm, but, we have coping mechanisms, some of which are really healthy. Exercise, journaling, deep conversations, therapy, coaching, we have some of those. We also have some really maladaptive adaptations. I don't know, that sounded like a tongue twister, but so we use drugs and alcohol, which is a drug. We engage in harmful behavior to ourselves. We overeat. We don't take care of ourselves. We don't exercise. We, shoot and kill people. That's the far extreme, obviously, but, so we, instead of sucking it up, we find healthy outlets to let those uncomfortable emotions dissipate. And we find some not healthy ways to do it as well. But regardless, so it's just saying that humans, there are things that we don't like, that are hard for us, that hurt our hearts, or, have a sense of wounding our sense of who we are, or making us question who we are, things like that. So the bottom line is that our children, just like us, they are emotional beings, and so they have things that are hard for them. And when we don't provide them with enough outlets to express those big feelings, guess what? They still have them. They don't go away just because we don't give them outlets. They have to get expressed somehow. And so aggressive behavior is sometimes the outlet that our children have for processing and getting those emotions out. So it's really important that if we want to have less aggressive behavior, then we need a substitute. We can't just take away the aggressive behavior and say, don't do that. We have to give them a substitute that they can use to process those big feelings. So that's the second mistake we make, is we don't give them enough of those outlets. So let me pause again. Ooh, this is so fun. I hope y'all are having fun because I'm loving it. Mistake number 3 that we parents make when it comes to dealing with our children's aggressive behavior is that we often try to teach or discipline, and by discipline I mean teach because that is what that word means. We often try to teach them in moments where there's still big emotions. Now, the big emotions might be theirs, they might be ours, or they might be both, but that is not the time for teaching. Teaching does not happen, well, let me rephrase that. Learning takes place in big emotional moments. The learning that often takes place in big emotional moments is the learning that we end up needing or wanting to unlearn because it's harmful things that we learn. And part of that is because when we are emotional, big emotions, sort of overwhelming emotions, we tend to be reactive. So one of my favorite tools for parents is interpersonal neurobiology, and you might know this work from Dan Siegel. And I have my hand up here for a reason like this. I'm not going to do a talking puppet, no. Interpersonal neurobiology, I'm not going to go into what that is, but I want to show you this hand model. And this is I first learned it from Dan Siegel. And this is a way to envision what happens in our brain as we go about life. So we have 3 parts, or 3 brains, the triune brain it's sometimes called. And so this part represented by my fingers here is our prefrontal cortex. So it is the part that we most commonly identify as our human brain. It's our logic, our reasoning, our ability to self-regulate, self-control. So it's that executive function to manage ourselves. Underneath the prefrontal cortex is the limbic brain. That's our emotional brain. That's where our feelings are. There's other things there too, but that's sort of our sense of feelings, our sense of connectedness, and it develops earlier. So as we go up, we start at early human development, like earliest in gestation, and then latter development. And the prefrontal cortex, before I get to the rest of the brain, this part of our brain, the current research indicates that it is not fully online, fully operational until our mid-20s. So, and some people I'd argue it's until their mid-70s. I'm not talking about anybody in particular, but maybe I am. It's not my husband. But this is part of the reason why that this part of the brain doesn't come online as fully functional so late. And so that is that idea where we think, gosh, what's up with teenagers? They're so impulsive, and why are they so, irrational? Because they don't have this online, it's just, that's part of it. And they have lots of hormones and things that make this go like this a lot of times. But this part doesn't develop until really late. So that's why I said, if you have even a teenager, what I'm talking about today, this responding appropriately to misbehavior, this is why it's still applicable to them, because they don't always have this self-control either. So prefrontal cortex, human brain, limbic or mammal brain, and then down here, the earliest part to develop is our brainstem, and that's that reptile brain. That's the part that is doing its best to keep our heart beating, our lungs recirculating air through our body. That is the part that's trying to keep us alive. So it's a really good part. It's not fun to disco with because it's not, it doesn't have a lot of skills besides breathing and beating our heart. But it is there. That's where we go into the fight, flight, or freeze way of functioning when we get really freaked out. But so going back to the whole idea of the third mistake that we make with our children's aggressive behavior is that when we or they or both are in big emotions, this part, that human part that's going to help us empathize and listen well to each other and not be defensive and not attack, because that's that reptile part, right? It's like jumping out at you, trying to get you so that you won't attack it back. That's down here. So, but when this part goes offline, when we flip our lid, as Dan Siegel says, then we've got either our emotions running the show or the fight, flight, freeze part of us running the show, both of which are going to not be at their most sweet and loving relational selves. So when you want to teach your children, when you want them to learn about, don't do this aggressive behavior, do this thing instead, you don't want to be teaching them when they're freaking out, either totally freaking out down in brainstem or just emotionally really overwhelmed, because they can't process it. They can't hear you. That's up here. And so when they don't have access to this part, it's like talking in one ear and it going out the other. So it's a real waste of your time. So if you like to be just effective in terms of managing your time, most parents would like that because we're not full up on time usually, then it's just not a good time to do it. And like I said, the other reason is that when we are in that place, one of these two places, we are going to tend to do some things or say some things that we later regret. So it's not really what we want to be teaching our children. And if they're in those places, again, they can't really absorb our teaching. So let me go over the 3 mistakes that we commonly make again, and then I want to tell you about a super wonderful, fantastic opportunity that I have, that if this topic has resonated with you today, or you find yourself with your child or children sort of feeling overwhelmed when they misbehave, I've got a wonderful free webinar, actual webinar, not a Facebook Live, one you have to register for and get on my list. I've got something wonderful coming up that I want to tell you about. So before I do that though, the 3 common mistakes that we make when dealing with our children's aggressive behavior is, number 1, we equate that behavior with an intent to do harm. So we say, it's not just a behavior, but they were actually deliberately trying to be hurtful, harmful, unkind, unloving. The second thing we do is that we don't provide our children with enough outlets to process their big emotions around life. And so they get stored up. And so one of the easy ways, if you will, for them to process and vent those emotions is to behave in aggressive ways. So if we don't want them to behave aggressively, we need to give them a different outlet to do that. The third mistake that we make is that we attempt to teach or discipline our children when they are have behaved in an aggressive way. We tend to try and teach them when emotions are too high, either our own or theirs or both. And that leads to wasting time and either ineffective teaching or sometimes harmful teaching, because we're actually teaching them some other things rather than the real lesson that we would like them to learn from the teaching. So I'm going to pause in just a minute, but let me do a quick info about this awesome webinar that I'm so excited. That's why I was actually a little bit late today, because I was putting a couple finishing touches on things. So this free webinar is called Banish the Misbehavior Blues: Peacefully and Productively Addressing Our Children's Most Challenging misbehaviors. And specifically what we'll be talking about, or what I'll be talking about in that webinar, are aggression, so aggressive behaviors, not listening, that part where you're like, did they suddenly stop being able to hear me? What's up with them? And resisting our lead. So being non-cooperative, whether we're talking about not putting on their shoes to go to school, or not helping set the table, or not putting on their clothes, things like that, or not brushing their teeth. Whatever the direction we're attempting to give them, their resistance, we'll be talking about that as well. So there is a link somewhere up above, I guess, in the description of this Facebook Live that's got the link, so you can register. Again, it's free. It's going to be on November 21st at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. However, if you can't make that because you're, cooking your turkey, or somehow, you have other things, you have a job or something else where you're not available, if you do register for the webinar, you will get access to the replay afterwards. But you don't get it if you don't register, so you actually have to get on the list. So that link, just because it's fun to say, but you can see it above, it's bit.ly, so B as in boy, it.ly/no more misbehavin'. And it's not behaving with a G, it's behavin'. So no more misbehavin'. So bit.ly/no more misbehavin', all one word. And that's where you can register for that webinar. So let me pause again. So thank you for sharing a willingness to parent in this way. When I look out in the world and I see things that I find really distressing, part of what I come back to is that there's so many of you out there in the world who are walking this walk with me, and who are doing your level best to show up day after day and moment after moment with the children in your lives, whether they're your children, they're children you care for who are not your own, or their grandchildren. You're doing your best to be there in this loving way, and sometimes really not knowing what the heck you're doing, because it is. We're pioneering in so many ways. So thank you each for the roles you play in children's lives, and thank you for letting me play a role in your life. It's deeply honoring to me, and I'm so glad you've been here today. Feel free to add more questions or comments. One more thing I want to say before I do my sign off is I just joined Instagram. Yay, more social media. So if you're on Instagram, if that's a place you connect, I've got lots of wonderful images and quotes and things that I'm sharing there. And so I'd love for you to follow me, share me with your fellow parents and friends. So thank you so very much. I am Shawnee Lavender. I am the Conscious Moms Coach, and you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on YouTube, you can find me on Instagram, and at my website, shawneelavender.com. And thanks so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye now.